Okay, Roger, kick us off.
Well, thank you, Haley, and good afternoon, everybody. We want to welcome you to our virtual roundtable on housing as a climate strategy. Our roundtable this afternoon is sponsored by Meta. My name's Roger Dickinson, and I'm the Policy Director for CivicWell, formerly the Local Government Commission. We've got an especially important and I think exciting topic for this afternoon. But before we get into that, just a couple of housekeeping details for everybody. If you have questions, and we certainly welcome those during the presentation, please put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then we will monitor that and facilitate the questions and answers with the participants at the end of their presentations. Also, please keep in mind we can address questions specific to your particular jurisdiction, but we do encourage you to keep your questions general so that they'll be of interest to everyone, and we can make them applicable across a broad spectrum for folks. So with those little details in mind, let me introduce our three excellent presenters this afternoon. I'm going to introduce all three right now at the outset so we can transition more quickly and smoothly from one to the next in order to expedite the presentations. Leading off is going to be Howard Penn this afternoon, and Howard is the Executive Director of the Planning and Conservation League, known by many as PCL, between starting businesses and co-founding nonprofits. Howard has helped develop pathways for private sector businesses to partner with non-governmental organizations of all types to promote sustainable economic, cultural, and environmental solutions. Following Howard is going to be Gabriel, Gabe, as we often call him because he's our good friend. Gabe Quinto, who is the mayor of the City of El Cerrito in the Bay Area in the East Bay. He began his first term on the council in El Cerrito in 2014, and he has served on the Marin Clean Energy Executive Committee as a board member for the League of California Cities, as president of the East Bay Division and LGBTQ+ caucus, and with the Sierra Club Bay chapter's executive and political committees, among his many other endeavors and activities. And finally, closing off the presentations for us today is going to be Mike McKeever. Mike served as Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg's chief of staff when Darrell assumed office, and was his senior policy advisor as well. That service followed 12 years for Mike as he served as CEO of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, known as SACOG. He was the principal creator of the Places 3S planning method and software designed to help planners understand the connections between land use, transportation, and air quality issues. So as you can see from those brief introductions, we've got quite an accomplished and diverse set of presenters this afternoon. And with that, Howard, let me turn the microphone, at least figuratively, over to you.
Thanks so much, Roger. Appreciate that. Let me get my screen up here. Let's go back to the beginning here. Is that showing up? There we go.
Yes.
There we go. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for participating today and joining us. I'm going to jump right in here with a short introduction here to PCL for those of you that don't know what PCL is about. We were founded in 1965 as a way to help protect and plan more appropriately for the growth that was happening back in the 60s. And we've done land use planning for all those years, including housing, transportation, and conservation. We're not a housing group. We specifically focus more on the land use and the transportation side of things as opposed to actually building housing. We have a C3 and a C4, and we've been instrumental in a number of environmental policies and laws over the last 55 plus years. Let me see, get this screen here. There we go. Ooh, one more. All right. Why is my screen not moving? There we go. It's a little slow. I wanted to focus on the last one here, on the land use history. We've been doing the land use, the housing, and transportation for a long time. And for the last 7 or 8 years have been really looking at housing as a part of that overall overarching climate change issue. So when the governor's office came out and put forward this housing as a climate strategy, many of us that have been working on this for a long time said it's about time, because many of us have been doing this for a very long time and promoting the fact that good housing policy is a climate strategy. So we are 110% behind this. What I'm going to talk about next is what that really means to us at PCL and to many of our partners that we work with. My slides are moving a little slowly, so sorry about that. I wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot here of California. And many of you are, I would believe, probably work in California here, so you have some of this here. My slides are moving now all by themselves because I hit the arrow keys too fast, I think, and it's moving slowly. Let me see if I can back up to the right slide. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so we lose on an average 40,000+ acres of agricultural land per year. This fluctuates based on economy, which is one of the biggest drivers for housing starts. Urban areas consume 1 acre per 9.4, and depending on who you get these stats from and which organization you look at, these are going to vary a little bit, but this kind of gives you a snapshot of what we're dealing with. One of the big issues that PCL is focused on, and that I focused on both personally and professionally over the years, has been sprawl. So many of these numbers are kind of highlighting how bad this is in California. We do have a lot of land, and so we sprawl quite well and quite efficiently into areas. 27% of GHGs from transportation, 57% of that, depending on, again, which stats you're looking at, are from light duty vehicles. So those are, residential vehicles or user vehicles. Yeah, see, there's my slides moving again. Stay there. There we go. And the last one, gross VMT is trending upward. That's been the case for many years. It's kind of flat the last several years. Let's take COVID out of the picture for a minute. It's been a little bit flat per capita basis, but still far above what we need to do to be able to meet our climate goals. So overall, for PCL and for the work that we do, VMT is one of the metrics that we really focus on for understanding what is happening with our land use policies. And that's a number that's quantifiable that we can look at. I don't know if many of you work with the VMT or 743, but we'll get into a little bit of that in a minute. So housing as a climate strategy. Our mission to make housing a good climate strategy is curtail sprawl while supporting equitable, sustainable infill that does not induce displacement or destroy existing neighborhoods or communities. This is a very tall order. Everyone can appreciate the complexity of this and how hard it is to get all of the like-minded and not like-minded parties together to make this work, but this is what we strive for. These are the principles that we have for climate strategy, housing as a climate strategy. The right type of housing in the right place, good location efficient criteria, we'll talk about location efficient criteria in a minute, can make housing a climate strategy, but you have to have those good location efficient criteria. And affordability and equity are an absolute key for us in terms of any type of housing strategy. All right, here's some of the, whoops, there it goes again, skipping on me. This is the first objective that we have in our principles. We need massive, massive infrastructure money invested in location efficient areas, not hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. We propose that we need to invest that in low VMT areas and then use those low VMT areas, which are being mapped out. there are challenges in terms of what jurisdictions have good maps and which ones do not. Mike may touch on that later in his presentation, but we're advocating for better VMT maps across the state. But those jurisdictions that do have good mapping, we know where the low VMT areas are. And if we invest in those areas and use that as kind of a zoning approach, that's the second point there, that will help us define and deploy and determine better where we need to put our housing, and then have the flexibility within those areas to build certain types of housing and work with communities and neighborhoods to do that correctly. I think I got a timer on this or something. I'm gonna go back. The definitions of infill, many of you have seen in legislation that many of us have worked on, that the infill definitions, there's pros and cons to them. We spend a lot of time noodling over specifics around the infill definitions. They don't always apply across the board. We like to say one size fits nobody in the state of California. And so often these definitions will work with certain applications or certain jurisdictions, but not others. So we've started to move our kind of methodologies to looking at the VMT areas as a zoning approach, as opposed to very specific infill definitions for a parcel-based exemptions or streamlining or investments. Not to say that those infill definitions aren't useful. It's just to say that we'll probably have better success if we start looking at a region or a zone as opposed to the specifics. And then the big question that we have is, how do you capture the value of these investments? If the public, if we as taxpayers are putting a ton of money into these areas, one of the challenges I keep proposing, or one of the challenges we keep bringing up, is that when developers or applicants are taking advantage of those investments, are we really seeing the cost of housing coming down? Or because of market rate housing, the market's driving whatever price they can get? We're not capturing the value of reducing the cost for housing. So we have a number of thoughts around this. We'll talk about it in a minute, but that's a big question for us, and how we can capture that value and what can we do with that, so that as we're dumping these massive amounts of dollars into infill investments and low VMT investments, we can get some of that value back. And then the last piece that I'm going to focus most on in the rural towns is, rural towns do have a lot of low VMT spots. They're very small little townships, and they have the services and the opportunities for growth. So we do need to focus on that more for the rural area. My slide jumped again. Okay, align location efficient housing with inclusionary housing requirements and anti-displacement criteria. These are pretty straightforward. I'm not going to read through all of them. I think Abraham or somebody's going to be supplying these presentations to people that want them, so you can have them later. But the big one for us is the inclusionary housing. We've got to enforce that or require that more often. However, that doesn't work so well in the rural areas because of the cost and the price break, because of the cost and because of the price breaks. And it's challenging for smaller project sizes. So in the rural areas, we have smaller housing projects and infill housing projects. It's harder to get enough inclusionary housing out of that project because of the cost structure. The third one, create a VC fund. I call it a value capture fund. It's something I just mentioned before. How can we do that so that we can have the increased property value that's created by this higher density and by the infill investments? How can we capture that in a way and then reinvest that for various programs, whether that be displacement programs or whether that be transportation programs and so forth? Okay, third one, we absolutely have to reduce VMT. We think VMT is the best proxy for changing land use and transportation behaviors. It's quantifiable. It's something, there he goes. Sorry about that. It's quantifiable. It's something that we can track. It's something we can map. It's something that we can see the change of behaviors over time. We feel you can incent jurisdictions to do it better. We can also look at proposed lower VMT areas and potentially help move areas into a low VMT status. the regulation of VMT under CEQA right now currently is the best proxy we see for internalizing the externalities. And we've got to incent the reduction of VMT as well as enforce when it doesn't. Okay, jumping on rural. Here's our population breakdown. 94% urban, 6% rural in the state of California. Roads, 72,000+ in rural miles, 102,000+ in urban. And our geography in the state of California is somewhere around 80% is rural. So that gives you a little snapshot of the size and the magnitude of this challenge in the rural environment. Okay, rural land use challenges. Road and infrastructure miles per capita disproportional to urban. There's a lot more miles of rural roads than there is the tax basis to pay for it. Housing property taxes are a budget driver, so rural jurisdictions see property tax as the #1 way to get revenue into their budgets. I'm sorry about this, folks. I don't know why. I probably have some timer on this I don't know about. And so acknowledging the fact that rural jurisdictions are going to want to continue to build more housing to be able to offset their budget deficits. Sales tax doesn't get generated very fast in rural jurisdictions. So housing property tax is where they look. The jobs and housing balance is upside down in rural areas. It's very hard for rural jurisdictions to create the numbers of jobs they need to create that jobs and housing balance, which throws your VMT off. Mass transit is not cost effective, sometimes physically challenged to build. And when they do have other types of shuttle services or bus services, many jurisdictions, they're underused. So consequently, TOD criteria quite often don't work. Complete streets are financially prohibitive. I tried to build some complete street stuff in the neighborhoods I live here in the Sierra Nevadas, and they're just so expensive because of the distances that have to be covered. I'm not saying all of these things are absolutely not available for rural areas, but we have to be very strategic about them, and they have to be very targeted. But on the whole, these things are the challenges in the rural areas. Sprawl-inducing land use policies, as you know, most rural areas, single-family housing is the biggest driver. You know, big subdivisions, and it's very hard to get high-density zoning for a number of reasons. I've got a gremlin controlling my slides here. There we go. And it just shut me off. I got one more slide here. There you go. A rural complaint, state and federal funding politically appropriated, meaning that when money is passed down the funnel, the feds and the state tend to allocate that to where there's a lot of population and a lot of political weight. And so the rural jurisdictions feel like they're not getting their fair share. And now they're having to deal with all this WUI planning, wildland urban interface planning, evacuation routes, and wildfire threats, which are making it even more challenging. Okay, here's a short synopsis of some of our solution sets. We need to reward rural jurisdictions for infill and VMT reducing projects. That means offsetting their transportation costs. It's the #1 cost in many rural jurisdictions that hits their budget that they don't have the money for. So if there's a way for us to incent low VMT and infill housing in rural jurisdictions and potentially proportionally or even disproportionately help offset their transportation funds, not for capacity increasing projects or new transportation structures, but for just basic maintenance and operations. That's a reward structure that we might be able to incent there. This is an easy one. Invest in cost-effective broadband. I say move, many people say move bytes, not bodies. We saw that during COVID. And then create micro enterprise funds for necessary rural services. There's a number of public-private partnerships that are happening with these services like groceries, healthcare, pharmacies, and so forth. They get these into rural areas, so you reduce your VMT for traveling for services. And the last one here, invest infrastructure monies in small infill projects in rural downtowns with inclusionary housing requirements. If we offset some of that cost for rural areas, then it can make it more cost effective to get some of this inclusionary housing into these projects. And the last point, rural jurisdictions push back a lot on 743. They don't feel like it's going to be helpful. They don't feel like it's meetable, that they can reach the needs and the criteria of 743. But we feel in working with many various organizations and jurisdictions. That is an opportunity to invest in rural infrastructure to curb VMT production. It's not a barrier to growth. So we need to work together to figure out how to incent rural jurisdictions to do this better. That's it. Back to you, Roger.
Great. Thanks, Howard. And we'll just go right to you, Gabe. Take it away.
Thank you, Roger. And I want to say thank you to Abraham, who will be taking care of the slides. Let's put up the slides there. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. My name is Gabe Quinto, and I am the current mayor for the City of El Cerrito. Today, I'd like to introduce to you the City of El Cerrito and provide with some real-world examples of how we are implementing housing as a climate strategy. The City of El Cerrito is in Contra Costa County in the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. El Cerrito is in the East Bay, just north of the city of Berkeley, and shares a border with the city of Richmond. It is largely a bedroom community and encompasses 3.9 square miles. Our population is just over 25,000 and is served by regional mass transportation, including 2 BART stations, the El Cerrito del Norte BART station on the north end of town and the El Cerrito Plaza BART station at the south end of town, providing quality housing that is within the extreme low, very low, and low income households is a high priority for the City of El Cerrito, given our high cost housing market. Next slide. For today's presentation, I will go over 3 main areas of how the city is achieving its housing goals. First, I'll talk about the city's housing and climate policies. Then I'll discuss our San Pablo Avenue specific plan. And last, I'll bring it together with the transit-oriented development that is occurring as a result. Next slide. In order for any agency to take real action, there needs to be a plan to do so. These plans must include goals and objectives that the agency is trying to achieve and must be the result of robust public engagement and feedback. Once in place, these plans serve as the roadmap for how the agency gets to where it wants to go. So the El Cerrito City Council has undertaken many efforts to address our affordable housing, climate, and economic development needs. As a result, several new policies and programs were adopted over the years, with particular focus on housing in the years since the dissolution of redevelopment agencies in California in 2011, in order to try to address the needs of the community. And you can see by this list, El Cerrito has been an early adapter of a strong climate action plan and urban greening plan, housing policies, including affordable housing strategy and inclusionary zoning ordinance, and our San Pablo specific avenue plan, which I will go to into more detail. I should also mention that all of these key planning initiatives that are on the slide have been implemented and are aligned with the goals and objectives of the city's strategic plan, which was a citywide effort adopted in 2015 to outline the mission, vision, values, and goals of the city. The strategic plan will be updated next year as well. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk what has become the city's signature planning effort, and that is a San Pablo Avenue specific plan. San Pablo Avenue in El Cerrito is the main commercial corridor. It is also a state highway, Route 123. So the roads are maintained by Caltrans and the sidewalks are maintained by the city. San Pablo Avenue runs the full length of El Cerrito, north to south, and has been historically been a throughway with auto-oriented businesses. In the past 2 decades, the city has worked hard to change San Pablo Avenue from a pass thorough to a destination. Further, the city has been seeking to take advantage in transit accessibility to the avenue to concentrate housing developments in order to facilitate developers to build along the corridor to do a program environmental impact report so that certain developments would easily allow within the parameters of the plan. The specific plan went through several versions and many community meetings and task force. It was adopted in 2014. The plan creates a framework for transforming the avenue into a multimodal corridor that functions not just as a thoroughfare, but a place that provides a multitude of opportunities for living, working, and community life. The goals of the plan are listed here: to enliven San Pablo Avenue, to encourage practical market-friendly development, to support climate action goals, and to create housing that serves a diverse population. When it was adopted, the program EIR for the specific plan analyzed a development capacity of 1,706 new residential units and 243,000 square feet of new commercial space. Between the plan's adoption and the beginning in 2019, over 1,400 residential units have been entitled or proposed, leaving only 282 units within the analyzed development capacity. Therefore, in order to continue with the plan's success, a supplemental environmental impact report was necessary in order to analyze and establish additional development capacity. This project has been underway since 2019, and tonight our City Council and our council later this evening will consider approval of the updated San Pablo Avenue specific plan and supplemental EIR to include an increase of 2,500 dwelling units and 100,000 square feet of additional commercial space. Next slide, please. One of the opportunities that the San Pablo Avenue specific plan has provided is a transit-oriented development, or TOD, at the El Cerrito Plaza BART station at the south end of town. By way of background, the 2018, the state legislature passed AB 2923 to allow for development and TOD standards for BART located property within 1/2 mile of the stations in Alameda, Contra Costa, and San Francisco counties. This legislation is intended to create new housing opportunities near transit in order to support California's housing and climate crisis. BART's system-wide goal is to produce 20,000 homes with 35% earmarked as affordable on its properties by 2040. AB 2923 requires local government agencies with land use authority over those properties to adopt local rules to meet these new development standards. The San Pablo Avenue specific plan already meets a substantive development standards in the law, which means that the City Council has not had to take additional zoning action, and so the property in El Cerrito was ready for BART to consider development. The city and BART has worked in partnership from the very beginning of the project's conception. Both agencies work together to create and adapt a shared set of goals and objectives for the project. These goals include sustainable community strategies, increasing ridership, and affordability, among others. Further, as part of a wider strategy for the city's infrastructure plans, BART agreed to consider including the potential of a new city library within the project. The city's current library is undersized and needs to be rebuilt, and this project provides a creative opportunity for the city's residents to benefit from a brand new library facility, and also creates a wonderful amenity in the development. The city's participated in the request for qualification process for the development, and in November 2020, the BART board chose Holiday Development as a lead market rate developer, Related California as a lead affordable housing developer, and Satellite Affordable Housing Associates as the co-developer for affordable housing. Next slide, please. The El Cerrito Plaza TOD will integrate community benefits and amenities for El Cerrito, including affordable housing, open space and art, multimodal transportation infrastructure improvements, and potentially a brand new city library. BART also received state and federal grant funding to study and identify parking and transportation strategies to enhance station access, in addition to the parking studies that will be undertaken by the city. With both the developer on board and grant funding to continue the work on parking and circulation, city and staff and BART have hosted numerous community engagement and input opportunities and will continue to do so throughout all of the phases of this project. As you can see on this map, BART owns 4 parcels consisting of 8.3 acres, and the site is zoned for 6 to 8 stories. Next slide. Over here, you see a photo of the conceptual design. You can see the BART station in the middle, surrounded by the buildings, open space, and the Ohlone Greenway bike and pedestrian path that runs the length of the city underneath the BART tracks. The design principles proposed by the developers are to, 1, consolidate open space at the station, 2, enhance the flow from the hills to the bay, 3, create a variety in the building scale, 4, transition from neighborhood to the downtown commercial area, and 5, to be sustainable in every scale. Next slide. On this chart, this shows the highlights of this project. The project will include 750 to 800 housing units. Of those, about 50% will be market rate, with 15% to be moderate income and about 35% to be very low and low income. This project will put us halfway to our updated regional housing needs assessment, also known as RENA, which really highlights the importance of partnering with BART to create this transit-oriented development opportunity. I should also note that the city is already considered one of the top performers in the state of California. We are currently one of only 38 cities in the entire state of California that is currently meeting its RENA goals. As previously discussed, the project will prioritize public, accessible open space, provide updated station access, including updated transit, which such as a new busway, bike station, updated bikeways, sidewalks, and street crossings. The design is meant to be context sensitive and sustainable. And of course, we are engaged in developing the 21st century library that would be a showcase to this entire project. Parking is also a hot topic in this development, and I'm sure that you know that the state has been reducing and eliminating parking requirements for TODs. This project will have a limited amount of replacing parking, and as you can see on this chart, up to 300 spaces will be available for residents of the project. By contrast, the parking lot as it exists has about 700 spaces. The city is currently undertaking a study of parking in its commercial areas and near the BART stations to look at both current and future needs of the commercial areas and around San Pablo Avenue and BART stations. Next slide, please. These are some of the sustainable elements of the project that we are particularly excited about. Obviously, as a transit-oriented development, the idea is to facilitate the use of BART and other transit like AC Transit, and will be pedestrian and bike friendly, as well as accessible to people with disabilities. The project will be an all-electric building with a solar photovoltaic system installed. The project will have material efficiency, including prefabricated materials, carbon sequestering concrete, and sustainably sourced wood. Water and waste management will be state-of-the-art, including sustainable landscaping. Not only is this project climate friendly as a TOD project, the buildings and grounds themselves will be environmentally sustainable as well. Next slide, please. While the El Cerrito Plaza project is in the beginning stage, we also have TOD projects underway happening at the other BART station at the north end of town. And it's the El Cerrito del Norte station, which is home to the Mayfair Housing Project, so named after the former grocery store that was at the original site at the station. I know Roger remembers that. With the city project, holiday development for housing, rate housing, and bridge housing for the affordable housing component. We are also about to begin construction in about 6 months with the El Cerrito del Norte Complete Streets project, which will completely transform the area with updated multimodal design elements. Phase 1 is a market rate housing, which you see at the picture shown in the lower left-hand corner. This picture has 156 units plus 8,900 square feet of ground floor commercial space. The building uses modular technology and was completed in the fall of 2022. It is currently leasing and will be occupied very soon. The property was a former redevelopment agency property that has been vacant for more than 30 years. So Holiday Development purchased one of the parcels and donated it to Bridge Housing for the affordable housing building, which is lower center, the lower center photo. This is phase 2 of the project and will consist of 69 all affordable units. The project is slated to break ground in late 2023, and several funding sources committed to the state, Contra Costa County, and the federal HUD Hope Main Street program and the city. And next slide, please. And here's some helpful links to everything I have described. I know that the team will be available. They will make this available to folks who are requesting this. So thank you very much.
Gabe, thank you. Very, very interesting. I'm sure there will be some questions about how you've been able to do all this on the cusp of some very, very significant changes in El Cerrito. Some of us who know El Cerrito from our childhood are amazed at some of the transformation, to say the least. And with that, I will pass it over to Mike to take us into questions and answers after his presentation.
Thank you very much, Roger. Thankfully, somebody more tech savvy than I is operating the slides. Could you please go to the next one? My career split almost exactly in half, with the first couple of decades in Oregon, first in Central Oregon, but mainly in Portland, where I owned an urban planning consulting firm, and then the last couple decades in Sacramento. This is not the purpose of this presentation, but I just want to say the differences between how planning is approached at the local level in Oregon and California are night and day. Oregon has a statewide planning law. The local, they call them comp plans, not general plans, city and county, must comply with standards and goals that are established at the state level. There are urban growth boundaries mandatory in the metropolitan areas to contain sprawl. There's a court system dedicated to land use to expeditiously litigate disputes. And the grand political and policy bargain between the environmental and developer community from the outset 50 years ago was that in exchange for complying with quite strict planning requirements, that development projects that complied with them would get built, and they would get approved quickly and inexpensively, and they would be encouraged to be built, not contested like they are almost always, it seems to me, in California. CEQA is a process law. It has done a lot of good, but it is not a planning law. I did work a lot on writing and implementing Senate Bill 375, which tries to get at this sprawl containment and climate change improvement at a regional scale. And I also have a little bit of blood on my hands for Bill 743 as well. I was involved in conceiving and passing that law. Next slide, please. My overall, I'm at a very high level here with this short presentation. Call it my theory of the case is that climate change and social equity are the two defining challenges of our time. They're both civilization threatening, society threatening. They are inherently joined at the hip. I don't think you can solve one without solving the other. And I believe that housing is an essential part of solving both. In fact, if I had to think of what subject area I would put higher than housing on that list, I don't know what it would be. Housing is such a critical part of both our economy and our social structure, and the threat that development patterns and travel patterns are causing to the climate. You look at any land use map, zoning, planning map, city, county, regional scale, 75 to 80% of the land is taken up with housing zoned land. That's what either leads to a contained, efficient land use pattern or a sprawled land use pattern. We need improvement in three basic areas on housing in California. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Number one, quantity. We need a lot more housing. We are systemically, massively underbuilding housing in this state. Secondly, location. And by location, I mean both micro and macro. At a neighborhood scale, it's important that housing be a part of a mixed use environment. As you just heard a fantastic example from Cerrito, and as Howard spoke about in the small rural villages and towns. You don't want an exclusive housing development. You want a mix of uses. And at the macro level, we have a diverse society, and so you can't put everybody in a 10-story apartment building in your downtown area. The world just doesn't work like that. But the amount of your housing that you have in your inner areas versus your efficient suburban areas versus your hinterland, exurban suburban areas and rural residential really matters. It's true that you can take a rural residential area and add use mix to it and make improvement in VMT and the quality of life of those people. But if a huge percentage of your growth is in those rural areas, no matter how efficient they are, they're still going to be less efficient than growth in an inner suburban area or in a downtown area. For example, in the SACOG region, the average VMT for a resident in Midtown Sacramento is 5 vehicle miles traveled per day per person. In a rural residential parcel of, say, 10 acres in the foothills of the Sierra, Placer, El Dorado County, the average VMT is closer to 50 miles per capita per day. It's an order of magnitude difference. We've got to have all lifestyles, but if you have too much of your market share going to those 50-mile-an-hour areas, you're cooked. You can't get where you need to get. And then finally, obviously, the product mix within the macro housing sector must be the right mix. You've got to have small enough, affordable enough houses that people can afford to buy. There's been a lot of very good demographic work done in California specifically that argues that we've already built enough single family homes in the ground today to serve market need for the next half century. What we need to be building are small lot and attached wall buildings. We've built the single family large lots. We do not need to be building any more of those. Next slide, please. Strongly agree with Howard's commandment number 1, that vehicle miles traveled is the best single metric to use. Now, I was involved in Senate Bill 375, which is not a VMT law. It's a carbon reduction law. And it's a good law, and it's done a lot of good. But as the fleet electrifies over the next decade or two, that law is not going to solve all of the problems. And there are many climate impacts from VMT and a spread out development pattern, even if the cars are electrified and they're run on renewable energy, where you've got embedded energy in the roads and other infrastructure, the pipes that you have to put underground and cement, concrete, just the climate impacts of sprawl go way beyond just the internal combustion engine in the passenger vehicle fleet. And even beyond climate impacts of the housing pattern, there are other really important impacts. There was a fantastic study done 6 or 8 years ago, jointly with Stanford and Harvard, on the social equity effects of sprawl. And what they discovered is that the most sprawled out regions in the country, if you happen to be born there, you have a lower chance of economic mobility than you do if you happen to be born into a region that is not as sprawled out. Mobility, transportation mobility is important for social and economic mobility as well. And of course, many on this call are also going to appreciate the environmental values of farmland protection, not pushing growth out into the wildfire zones. And no single metric is perfect, but I would be hard pressed to think of a better single one to plan to than VMT. So I support Howard's preaching on that. Next slide, please. This state and some local governments, unfortunately, the local government you heard just before me is a best practice local government in the state. I wish there were 300 more like El Cerrito, not just 30 some more. But it's great to have great behavior for others to follow on the ground. But we don't have statewide a good history of building enough housing, building it in the right places, pushing back against NIMBYism. And in the last couple of legislative sessions, I'm not going to try to authoritatively tick off these laws, but there have been improvements made. All of them, in some way or another, start to whittle away at local government discretion and what they can do about housing. Some decisions have to be by right. In some cases, you can't prohibit certain kinds of housing. And so there is hope. It is happening, but it's slow. And so the main point I want to make is that I think, even though honestly, I would love to transport the Oregon planning system into California, I think everybody would be a lot happier. I'm smart enough to know I'm not going to live long enough to see that. So I really want to focus on this idea of aligning funding. Local governments are different from state and federal in that they're general purpose governments. They have to balance, they know a community is comprised of many things, and you have to balance it all out and optimize in order to have a quality neighborhood, a quality city, county, and region. And the states and the federal governments are aligned in silos. And the housing departments don't always talk to the transportation departments. You don't always talk to the air quality departments. And there's a lot of petty competition sometimes that occurs there. And if there is a way, and California is getting better at this, but there's a long ways to go to align funding for all of these different kinds of programs, whether it's environmental cleanup or transit or road transportation, various flavors of housing, both market rate and rent controlled and affordable, etc. If there is a way for the state and even ideally the federal government to speak with one voice, so that when the mayor goes to build his transit-oriented development, along a key arterial, and you know it's not all just about the housing or all about the mass transit, it's about a lot of costs, that the state would be at the table with one voice saying, we're organized and we will help you do that. I know a lot of local elected officials. One of them I worked for a long time, Roger Dickinson, who would have been delighted to have the state or federal government show up and say, really, we're organized. We're all here to help you. How can we help you meet our requirements and do what you think is best for your community? So money talks, money talks, money talks. And if we don't have the political will to go to what I would consider a much more serious rubric for overall land use planning, I think if we can get the money aligned, that we can still get there. So last slide, let me just close with this. Boundaries of all types are the problems. There's boundaries between cities and counties, both physical and political. There are boundaries between city and county members and their COGs and MPOs. And then there are boundaries between they and the state. And when you get to the state, of course, you have the different departments. They don't often all work together. Ditto at the federal level. Simply aligning all of these public sector interests so that they're working together will make the money go the existing money go so much farther and be so much more effective. So this is my bully pulpit, not bully pulpit, my most religious zeal closing. Anything you can do to better coordinate, better align, work with your neighbors, work with people who ought to be partners, not competitors. The social equity and the climate change issues are both crises. We do not have time to go slow. So get the money aligned and get people working together. I think that's the most hopeful big picture concept I can put on the table to make progress. Thank you.
Well, Mike, thank you. We appreciate your religious zeal, to say the least. But you know, where you ended, we're going to now turn to some interactive opportunities with viewers. But where you ended is something that I think we can extend in our conversation. And actually, what I'd like to do is take your point about the state and the federal government being supportive and complementary to local governments that are attempting to do what needs to be done to harmonize social equity and climate. I'd like to take that premise and ask Gabe and the work that you've been doing in El Cerrito, both with all three, with the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, with the Plaza development, and with the Del Norte development. Where, if anywhere, have been the state and federal governments in your city's efforts?
They've been there for us, actually, and you know, we have collaborated with our Assembly Member Buffy Wicks and with Senator Nancy Skinner, and you look at Buffy being the head of housing, so that has complemented the things that we would like to do here in El Cerrito, especially you know, dealing with 2923. So looking at the question that Andy had, you know, we're an example of a city that is doing this the right way, you know, and collaborating with our partners in Sacramento, but also on the federal level to make sure that we get the funding that is necessary to build this. And it takes a very, very long time. And you see the homelessness situation that we have here locally in the East Bay, and it's out of control. So the faster that we get this done, the better, because you know, families and individuals are hurting right now. So I truly believe when it comes to developing our priorities, it's communities that are not just able to maximize value, but also provide community benefits as possible. So you have this top-notch staff that that is working with BART on the Plaza project, and we work very closely with the developer, which was there. It's actually the same builder, the group that creates the housing there in Mare Island, Vallejo, will be doing the same thing at the El Cerrito Plaza development. So we work with these people, and these folks have been great in working with community leaders, working with our neighbors. So when they were building the Mayfair project, everyone got along and they were prepared to make sure that they had rules when it came to building, and they would only do it in certain hours, and they stuck to that. So they partnered with the city, and they did a great job in making sure that this was built. But you look how long that lot has been open, and it's just it's been more than 30 years. So that old market was torn down many years ago, but we've gone through different plans in building that, and we've come to the right type of housing there. And folks, this is the major BART station for folks that need to go further north in up to Vallejo and Solano counties. So it's the busiest station in West Contra Costa, and it's always tied as the busiest one in Contra Costa County as well.
Now, Gabe, have either the state or the feds brought, besides their support, some money to the table through the infill infrastructure
Absolutely
program, or LEAP or REAP or
Yeah, no, they have, and I want to thank the head of budget in the assembly, who was able to work with BART and get $24 million for the Plaza project for BART. And that is going to pay for a parking structure, that's going to pay for better signage. It's going to pay for the parking system that we will have in the neighborhoods. So we're working in every level of government, and including the state and the federal and the county. We've had to use federal funding. So the people that have it's gone through a there's so many people that need housing, and so people come from all over the Bay Area, and there's a waiting line. So it's done by a lottery. So this shows how we need to do more of this, and we should have done it yesterday. So I'm looking forward to cities around us to get their projects ready and have it ready, and let's build, because we haven't built in 30 years. So the inner Bay Area needs it the most. So I'm proud that we're doing this, and we have other projects along San Pablo Avenue that will complement AC Transit buses that will take you directly to the Salesforce Tower. So so a lot of people would like to move in here. It's just not affordable. So little starter homes are costing more than $1 million now here in El Cerrito. It's just not affordable. So I appreciate our staff and the city for sticking to what we would like to do, and that is to build housing for everyone. And we're truly doing this.
I know we may have some more questions about the El Cerrito specific circumstances, but Howard, I want to bring you into this as well. Coming back to Mike's thesis that the essential character of connecting climate and social equity, but in the context of getting support and money. Mike said money the more suburban and rural parts of the state. What do you see happening there?
Yeah, first I want to just compliment Mike and his money approach. I can't agree more that we are going to have to make some hard choices, I should say critical choices, to put the type of money and the amount of money into this that's going to work. Yeah, let me back up from the rural area. You're asking a rural suburban, and we have many various types of jurisdictions, cities and counties in the state. California is a very diverse, very large geographical and socially diverse state. And so the challenges that we've been running into, especially working with cities and counties that have very large geographies, they're trying to service their populations across that geography with very little money. And I think that, what you're saying from a social equity point of view, Mike was bringing up, as that's the marriage between that and the climate strategy. That encompasses everything, the behaviors, the daily social behaviors, the transportation behaviors, the services that are there, and the lifestyle that people are living. And as he was mentioning earlier, with those 10-acre plots, we're seeing too much VMT that's not being reduced. And we're not seeing the high density buildings in the rural areas, and to some extent in many suburban areas. So to answer your question, what do we need to do to get that money? That was one of the questions that was asked in the Q&A here. We had the old redevelopment agencies. There are conversations floating around about redevelopment 2.0. There's been a renaming of that, say a rebranding of that, so we don't even get into the redevelopment thing, which is controversial. There's EIFDs, there's other ways to be able to kind of put infrastructure and investment structures in place. We've been looking at a variety of applications where you could do infill districts. Here's some controversial ideas. In the affordable housing world, when taxpayer money is going to help pay, or tax credits and so forth, there's a cap on margins. The missing middle of the housing sector doesn't cap the market rate. So if we invest hundreds of millions and billions of dollars into infrastructure that applicants are gaining the rewards in their margins, we're not telling them that they only have a certain amount that they can make. Now, again, this is very controversial. I'm not saying this is an easy solution, but how can we actually continue to dump money into this industry, in this market, and not somehow reap the rewards as a society? And so that's the value capture. Can we cap margins? Can we manage the expectations of that from the private sector? Because housing in California and the United States is a private sector enterprise. It's not public housing in a sense. What can we do to capture that if we're dumping millions of dollars in? That's the question was asked about. Can we do that? Can we actually limit that amount? Can we get it on property taxes? But that's a whole other thing. The last one was a VMT fee. There's been many of us, since Mike and many others, and you had some dealings with this, Roger, and 743 have talked about this. Is there a way to charge VMT fees on bad sprawl projects and take that money and reinvest it in good infill projects? People don't want to see that. They don't want to acknowledge that we've got to somehow reduce the amount of sprawl projects we're having and make it more cost effective to build infill. So on the rural areas, if we can do that in small little townships, and we can invest that money into infrastructure, and I see that in lots of the towns up in the Sierra Nevadas where I live, sewer and water infrastructure and broadband infrastructure, all those costs. And the cities can't pay for all of that. They don't have a tax basis to pay for it. So we need to subsidize it. And we need to make sure that those costs are approachable so that they're not incented to build more sprawl housing subdivisions, creating property tax revenue for these jurisdictions, because that's the only place they can get their taxes. So a couple controversial ideas. I'm not saying they're going to be a silver bullet, but I think we really need to start thinking differently about how we're going to move money into areas to keep them viable and invest money in places that are going to really create high dense infill in low VMT zones.
And so with respect to more rural communities, I think as you're pointing out, the magnitude of what you can capture is generally not going to be enough, regardless of what methodology you use, whether it's tax increment or EIFDs, whatever it might be. It's not going to be of sufficient magnitude to really make a significant dent in the financing of the kind of supportive infrastructure that you need to encourage a more dense form of development and maybe mixed use form of development. Is it, Howard?
No, it's not. The math doesn't pencil out. So that's why we keep coming back to, one, we don't want to incent development in rural areas. Another question that was asked was about the RENA numbers and whether that actually is not structured correctly for a climate solution. I agree, it's not. If we're requiring housing to be built in areas where the housing and the job balance isn't there, and we really shouldn't be building housing in that area, then let's not make that a requirement. Let's change the way in which we look at our RENA requirements, not by the boundary lines like Mike was talking about that are somewhat arbitrary and don't collaborate together. Let's look at it as a region. How do we actually incent the right type of housing in a region and not assign that to particular jurisdictions? That leads to, what do we do for the jurisdictions that if we tell them you can't build any more housing because of your wildfire, your WUI, and your climate, policies don't work, and you're generating too much BMT, they're not financially going to survive. And so that's the offset of how do we actually help those jurisdictions. I look at it as that's a climate investment. Instead of having local rural jurisdictions and even suburban jurisdictions, we could throw these terms around, but in terms of the census breakdown of what makes something rural and suburban, there's a lot of gray area in there, right? But in places that are less dense, where we have some of those lifestyles that incent larger tract lands, policies that incent that, people that want to live that type of lifestyle, and they don't want high density in those areas. What can we do for those jurisdictions not to continue down that pathway of continuing to build, single family subdivisions and ranchettes and driving our VMT through the roof, but take that money and invest it in the infill areas? But what are we going to do to backfill their budgets? If they don't have a way to get money elsewhere, that's the only answer, right? Is to build more rooftops. So I look at this as an economic, back to Mike's issue. This is a money thing. This is, where do you put the money and how do you offset the threats and the pressure points for these jurisdictions to do the right thing?
So let's pursue this line, Howard. You referred to one of the good questions in the Q&A about whether we need to rethink RENA allocations in effect. And Mike, you had to deal with RENA as the executive director of SACOG. You're certainly obviously well aware of it otherwise in the work you've done. And seems to me part of what Howard's saying is maybe we ought to be rethinking how we think about fair share in terms of affordable housing rather than the way we've been doing it. What do you think about that?
I think it's complicated.
And let me complicate it just a little further by saying, how do you put that and then your context of addressing climate and social equity?
Right. Okay. So I have thought a great deal about this. I wish I had a crisper answer, but let me try to be as succinct as I can, and there won't be a definite clarity after this. So let me go back to what I said briefly during my slides, which is that we have a diverse society. It's not realistic or even a good idea to think that the goal of good planning is to make everybody live in a 20-story building in our region in downtown Sacramento. That's crazy. But it's also not good planning what we've done for, when we started the blueprint 20 years ago, where 80 to 85% of the new housing growth was going to the edge of the region. And it was going into largely large lot, single family homes, fair amount of rural residential, but mainly large lot, single family homes. And so what we tried to do at SACOG, because we had a diverse board, 22 cities and 6 counties, from very rural to suburban to urban, is, say, from a climate change standpoint, and VMT was right behind that curtain, what can be done to help to improve performance in all of those areas? And so if you take and the suburbs are making a fair amount of progress on this and having a greater mix of land uses now through infill development, and having more diverse housing blend, not where they need to be, but there's improvement. So if you can take a suburb that has on average a VMT per capita of maybe 20 miles a day per person, and through some higher density, greater product mix housing, and more thoughtful mix of uses at the neighborhood scale, reduce the number of car trips, increase walking and biking. The car trips that are left in the system that are local are shorter on average. And if you can drive that city's per capita VMT down from 20, say in the future, to 15, you're making a lot of progress. 15 doesn't sound as good as 5 in Midtown, but you're going to have a certain percentage of your population in the suburbs no matter what. And so if you can make that more efficient, you have a straight face argument that that's a VMT saver. And so if you had a carbon fund, those people that wanted to transform those communities, as I've described, should be able to compete for, in our state, cap and trade money. So this argument goes for those kinds of behaviors. The but, and this applies to Howard's rural villages too, if you can take a typical household that drives 50 miles a day per person, and by adding, sprinkling in, not pouring in, some jobs and some grocery stores and some things that reduce their trip making behavior down to 45 miles a day, you're making progress. It's still a big number, but it's lower than it was before you diversified the village center there. And this goes right into the social equity issue, because on one hand, the transportation costs of living in the suburbs and the rural areas in this region are just a killer for lower income people, who can't afford cars in the same percentages as middle and higher income people. And so if you want to integrate those very white suburbs, it's hard. And you have to ask yourself, are you really doing people a favor to move them farther away from job centers where there's less transit for the sake of diversifying the ethnic mix within a community? That said, there's abundant research that racially and economically mixed communities perform better on almost any variable you can imagine. And so we have to find a way to diversify the neighborhoods and diversify the very homogeneous suburban areas and rural areas. But I think we can do that and drive VMT and carbon down at the same time, as long as we do it in the right amounts. It can't, this sounds like I'm waffling, and I guess I am, but you can't do it so much that you don't have enough market share left to go into the really low VMT areas, the five per day VMT areas in the downtowns, because you really need that development.
So are we, I think in a couple of the questions go in this direction, are we actually thinking about this in the wrong way, looking backwards rather than forward? That is to say, maybe these were trends that we're going to develop in any case, but certainly what the pandemic did, or seems to have done, is motivated people to actually disperse more than collect. The discovery that many jobs can be done remotely has led people to a number of conclusions. One of which has been, I don't need to live in a high-priced urban area in order to keep my job. I can go live in a lower-priced rural area, connect with internet, and they're going to just put the state's going to put $6 billion into improving broadband. The feds are putting in a ton of money into improving broadband. I don't need to live in the place where my job is. I can live anywhere, but I may still have to get in my car to go get groceries or go to the hardware store or whatever that is that I need to get. And this is for all three of you, what do you see as the impact of that phenomena over what we've been talking about is desirable to accomplish in terms of using housing as a climate strategy, achieving social equity, integrating our neighborhoods in every respect, all those goals. Gabe, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure.
first?
El Cerrito is proof that this can be done. And we're in the daytime, we're a very diverse city, and we want to keep it that way. And we want to have a diverse community like we've always had in the past. We're not having back in the day when you and I grew up here, Roger, it was every house had a family. Now it's basically a single person or a couple, and we have a lot of new families. So looking at that and looking at the trend with a lot of folks who have moved in here recently, they can have their office at home and they don't have to commute as much as they used to. And we discovered that through COVID. So looking at that, the new way of working and possibly taking public transportation to the office like once or twice a week, and that's what's happening in my household right now, and taking BART there direct. This city has always been a transit first city because most of our folks take BART to San Francisco, Oakland, or to Berkeley. But now, because of the changes, because of COVID, we have tech people living here now, and they can have their dream house on the top of the hill and probably on your street, Roger, where you grew up, and with their multi-million-dollar view there. And they can work and look at that view at the same time. So there's good parts of it and bad parts of it. The good part of it is less vehicle miles traveled. Another good thing is, 2923 definitely helped in creating what we're creating right now in El Cerrito, and partnering with our transportation. Like BART and AC Transit, they delivered as well. And this is why this Plaza project is great for the area, and the BART stations in Berkeley are included as well, and they plan to do the same thing. It's because of what everyone has discovered. You don't have to be in the office all the time. So I know it's bad for downtown San Francisco, but here in El Cerrito, it's good for families, and it's good for both working spouses that they'll be able to trade off and have time at home as well to take care of the kids, take care of the dog, and less vehicle miles traveled. So also El Cerrito has always been a home to UC Berkeley students. Students that are working on their second degree or finishing off their PhD or law school. So we've always had that in the mix in El Cerrito, and that 35% affordable housing that will be included, we'll be thinking of the students that would like to return to El Cerrito, but just starting out in their professional careers, and they will be able to move into great housing that BART will be providing.
Okay, so Gabe says El Cerrito's going in the right direction with consideration of all these factors. Howard, what do you see on a broader scale in the work you're doing?
Well, like Mike said, I wish we had 300 El Cerritos, right? But where I live up in the Sierra Nevadas, we don't have El Cerritos. So our challenge, and let me go back to your question, Roger, that recently, especially with COVID, we have seen a significant increase in demand for that rural lifestyle, and a lot of transplants from urban environments that are now telecommuting or virtual work, whatever we want to call it now. The challenge with that is that let's touch the elephant in the room here. The NIMBYism that's there around circling in the rural areas especially are being pushed significantly up against the wall now, because working landscapes in these rural areas can't afford often to keep being agricultural, and so they have large tracts of land that are being eyeballed with development, especially ranchettes at 5 acres or 3 acres, like we were saying, those big parcels that just kind of keep checkerboarding our landscape. And there's money coming in. And so it's driving the price, or it's keeping the price high. And locals really want housing for their kids to be able to have their extended families live in this area, and they can't afford it. So there's your problem set. Do I have a solution other than not chunking up or breaking up this agricultural land and rezoning? No. I think I'm not a proponent or putting forward a proposal that Sacramento come down and absolutely lay down the law of the land here, but we are creating, the market is creating pressures and threats that we have not seen at this level in the past, decade or more. So I think some of these proposals that all of us have brought up here today, or thoughts, conversations that we're all bringing up here today, need to be accelerated extremely quickly. And do I have a silver bullet? No. I do agree with Mike that we better align all of our interests and our agencies sooner than later. Somebody asked the question about 3 million homes needed to be built. Many of us will argue about how many homes we really legitimately need in California, given the remake-up of our mix and so forth. But regardless of what that number is, we know we're well short of what we need. The challenge is just going to be, how are we going to change our expectations and behaviors to put that housing in the right place in order for housing to be a climate solution. And I think that all of us are going to have to really apply pressure to the leadership, basically at the legislature, at the Capitol level and the governor's office, to make that happen, because it's really easy to slide on the criteria necessary to make housing a climate strategy. And then this will just be a nice soundbite, which I'm really scared of it happening, that this just becomes a nice marketing ploy to build more housings everywhere. And it's really not going to solve the climate problem. And the pressures that you asked, Roger, about this moving into exurbia and the rural areas because of the demand now for remote work and remote, living options, being able to live in remote places, we're feeling even more and more.
Well, and Mike, let me take that point and turn to you for the last comment on this. Are we, in fact, by virtue of this, actually seeing things get worse? That is to say, the people who are able to work remotely are not the people who are working in grocery stores and in fast food restaurants and at the cleaners. They're not the essential workers who don't have the income or the mobility to move to these more distant places or remote places. Are we at, and they are often, obviously, as we know, people of color and women. Are we making things worse?
Well, possibly, but I do think there's a way to get more good than bad out of the dynamics that you have your finger on, Roger. And we need to be, you got a bunch of planners on here, and planners are famously wrong about predicting the future. So we need to be appropriately humble about, let's just talk about telework, how much of it there's going to be in the future and how long and et cetera. My best guess is that there is some structural change that is going to last from the discoveries that people have made about different lifestyle potential as a result of the pandemic. And I do think if it's done right, that there are more wins than losses about some additional rural development being made possible from that. If it's too much, then you've got the problems that Howard's got his handle on. But there's another benefit to it, I think. And I'm going to bring in one other trend here. I know we're running out of time. If people vacate downtown office buildings to work at home, and they don't have to work on in a small unincorporated village. It could be that they're staying in Elk Grove. A lot of state workers live in Elk Grove, used to fill up downtown Sacramento office buildings every day and then get in their car and sometimes on the train or the buses and go home. I think those vacant office spaces are potential housing in the downtown. And the more housing, as we all know, you get in downtown Sacramento, the quicker you're going to have a real downtown that's a 24-hour downtown, et cetera. And the other thing I want to point out, not really a topic of this, but the change in the retail sector, that started with Amazon and whatnot, but also went on steroids where there's just vacant retail everywhere. I also think are marvelous opportunities for housing. I mean, they're going to do that with I think the Sunrise Mall in Citrus Heights. It's had a bunch of vacant space. They're going to turn some of that into housing. I think for the service workers that you're appropriately worried about, that those kinds of housing opportunities through very thoughtful investment, from all levels of government could be created in areas that are in infill areas that are almost always on transit lines. And we can maybe get a little bit of a win for the rural areas that need a little bit more mixed development and the other areas as well.
Well, Mike, thanks. We'll take that as the final word.
The hopeful close.
if not the ultimate. I hope all of you who've tuned in have found this as stimulating as we have. And I really do want to extend my thanks to Howard, Gabe, and Mike for sharing their thoughts and expertise today. And thank all of you for joining us. As we close, I want to say this event is sponsored by Meta as part of a series of virtual roundtables CivicWell is hosting on the subject of housing. We hope you'll take just a moment to fill out the survey that was just linked in the chat. That helps us with planning for the future. And finally, we will also make the recording of this event available. So please look for that in your inbox, along with information about how you can become a member of CivicWell to receive additional resources exclusive to our members. Once again, to all, thank you. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday and good evening.